I sat with it for a long time, and I suppose the only transition regret I have is not having enough information to learn to know that it is really okay to stop. There aren't stories of people stopping except the ones that
Yeah.
gender critical people co-opt for their,
Yeah.
bank of evidence.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
the reason I use the word retransition rather than detransition is because I'm not trying to get back to where I was before I came out at 21. As I said, I've always been trans. From the day I was born, I've always been trans and I've always been a lesbian. My
Mhm.
gender experience has never been cis at any point. Even when I looked like a girl and I lived as a woman, I was not having a cis experience.
Hello and welcome to the 50 Shades of Gender podcast. We get curious about all things gender, sex, and sexuality, as well as relationships, feminism, the inclusive kind, neurodivergence, disability, kink, mental health, and all that makes us humans unique and diverse. From body positivity to body dysmorphia, it's all welcome here. Visit the website 50shadesofgender.com, as in FIFTY, for helpful resources to support us or to find out about our gender diversity and allyship workshops and courses. A massive thank you to those who have donated and those who are or used to be patrons. You really make a massive difference. I appreciate you and you're awesome. Thanks also to those of you who have sent in your stories, poems, and art for the Anthology of Hope. I've been absolutely blown away by your incredible grit and joy and defiance, and of course, hope. The book will be out somewhere in the middle of 2026, and I know I keep threatening to launch a crowdfunder as well, which I will do, and I will keep you posted. Go to 50shadesofgender.com/hope for more information and updates. Now join us on a journey of inclusion, acceptance, and respect. I'm your host, Esther Lemons. I am a queer woman, and my pronouns are she and they. In this episode, I have a conversation with Frank Levermore, a counselling and psychotherapy master's degree student with the goal of bringing accessible, trauma-informed care to the queer community and co-founder of the Queer Joy movement here in Norwich. Frank's pronouns are he, they, and she in sort of preference/frequency order, and he is a transgender freak and genderqueer dyke. Find out what that means to Frank in this episode. We also talk about the limitations of language, translesbianism, the journey of retransitioning, the importance of queer spaces and community, what it's like training to be a therapist, and the sacredness in finding yourself. It was recorded on the 7th of February 2026. Now let's get into the episode. Hello and welcome. What's your name?
Hi, I'm Frank. I'm really excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yay, welcome, Frank. So the labels you gave me, I love this, transgender freak and genderqueer dyke, which I absolutely love. So where would you like to start? Should we start with a transgender freak?
Yeah, we can start there. I've sort of I kind of, I suppose, always make the joke, and you had a guest on recently who said they sort of transcended gender,
Mm,
which is something I totally resonate with, in the sense of like I feel like I've done it all, and at this point, it's everything and nothing is how I would describe my gender. I came out when I was 21, and I'm one of those people who was certainly always I always knew something was different about me. When I was a kid, I lived as a cat for some time, in fairness. But then also, I was like, I'd like to be called Michael for, however long, and we're talking like 4 or 5. That didn't stick. So, we move. But yeah, and something was always just slightly off. Something was always slightly wrong, and I didn't really know what that was. I just always had this kind of visceral discomfort. And you can see it really in pictures of me as a young person, just this general wrongness that I felt and kind of exuded. And so at 21, I tell the story like I went to the barber shop or a hairdresser's for the first time. Normally, our mum's friend would cut our hair. So, and I told her what I wanted, and she was this incredible woman who didn't judge. She didn't ask questions, and I was terrified. And I just said, "Look, whenever I want this haircut, I always get given this one, and, I'd like it to look like this." And I also wanted it to be dyed ice white, which everyone at the salon was quite excited about because 'cause they'd never done it before, and I ended up being in there for about 6 hours. So, anyway,
what?
so she finishes the haircut, sort of spins me round in the chair to look in the mirror, and it was like I was looking at myself for the first time in 21 years, which is it's a very surreal experience, and I don't know how to explain it really to people, I suppose, who don't have a trans experience, but it was suddenly like, "Oh, there I am," you know? So I rushed home and came out to my mum, and so it began. So and on reflection, looking back now, it feels like I transitioned away from femaleness, but it felt as though maleness was therefore the only option. And, this is 7 or 8 years ago where I think non-binary identities were really struggling even in the trans community. There was a real invalidation of non-binary
Mm.
identities at that time. I wouldn't consider myself non-binary now. I think genderqueer and genderfreak explain it enough. And then I sort of got to the point on hormones when I was like, "Oh, I'm becoming far more masculine than I actually want to be." And actually my hormones I was on testosterone really high. I had really high levels for a considerable amount of time after about 5 years on T. And it was scary because there was a lot that was happening, quite intense masculinization, which is perfectly fine, but it just wasn't for me. And I was at the time also exploring parts work in therapy. I was reading about it. So, internal family systems, Richard Schwartz,
Mm.
which as a trainee psychotherapist it really spoke to me anyway. It spoke to me, before I was a trainee, but and the idea is that we have, a number of parts within us, and I had lived as stealth in a couple of my jobs. So I wasn't out
Mm.
as trans in those jobs, and I started to find that I was becoming really separate, and I was shaming a lot of that young part of me, and
Mm.
who she was, and forgetting that she was the foundation of who I am now.
Mm.
So I began to do a lot of meditation where I was trying to get in contact with that part and just have a conversation with her and apologize essentially for
Wow.
ignoring her. And it was really powerful on
Yeah.
a very spiritual level to kind of turn around and give my younger self the hug that she was desperate for, really, that I had denied her for so long. And
Mm.
after that, I sort of found that I was really connecting to my femaleness again, to my femininity, and it kind of blew the whole thing wide open. I was like, I started experimenting with different pronouns. I was like, I had a partner at the time, and I was like, I feel like I like the title girlfriend instead of boyfriend. And I was just
Mhm.
exploring all of these things, and it felt like coming home, but in a new way. I still very much like my masculinity. I don't regret any of the transition that I experienced, but it felt like I was retransitioning. I was rediscovering parts of myself and integrating them. So, yes, what I mean by gender freak is I just think it's all made up, and there's so many parts of me that have different genders and see themselves in different ways. And I sometimes get out of the shower and I look at my, masculine hairy body, and I think, what a beautiful woman. Or I'm feeling feminine and cute, but I feel like a man, or I feel like neither, or I feel like both, or I feel like something in between that doesn't have a word. And I struggle with, I use any pronouns, but even then it doesn't quite capture what I feel, and I feel very limited by our language in that sense. And I understand
Mm.
the struggle because sometimes my friends are like, they'll make a joke and be like, "Oh, something, something like a man or whatever," and I'm like, "Well, I'm not a man," and they're like, "But sometimes you are, and we can't keep up," and I'm like, "Girl, neither can I." Do you know what I mean? But totally fair, you know. And I didn't really publicly commit to all pronouns until I volunteer at a charity, and we support young trans people. And every month we sit in a circle, we introduce ourselves, and they try out new names, and they try out new pronouns, and they try out new clothes. And I thought it's a very healing space for me, certainly for my younger self, to see these young people have the words to describe their experiences, which I feel like I did not
Mm.
have. I'll come to that in a moment. And I said to them, "You guys are really inspiring." And every month I sit here and I choose what is easy, which is he, him. And I'm like, "Oh, that's not actually entirely the picture." So I'd like to use all pronouns. And they were great. they were in their sort of teenage sarkiness, as expressive as they could be with their support. I'm sure they probably were like, "Okay, whatever, not that big a deal.
Yeah.
Like, don't be
Yeah.
weird about it," kind of thing. But yeah, and that was nice because I felt that younger part of myself. She was there with me and she was like, "Oh, here we are. We're all together." So I hope that explains what I mean by gender freak. Anything and everything and nothing all at the same time. And I could change my outfit 3 times a day, or in the morning, I could completely shave all my facial hair, and by the afternoon, I've deeply regretted it. But the point is, it doesn't matter. I feel in this constant state of flux, which is
Mhm.
truly wonderful and difficult to put into words, as I mentioned earlier. But yeah, so that's the long and long of it, I suppose.
Yeah. Gosh, I love that. There's so much, it's so juicy, like, there's so much in what you just said that I'd love to sort of touch on, and I think it's
Yeah.
probably all left my brain now. So, yeah, you just talked about, like, non-binary not quite fitting, but more like genderqueer
Mm.
being more of a fitting term, and you also listed genderqueer dyke, I believe. So where does that come in?
Yeah.
Because you mentioned in your bio as well, if you could use lesbian to describe your gender, you would. So how does that all
Yeah.
fit together?
Yeah, no, great question. So before I, ever explored gender, I had a friend at school who joked that I came out of the womb. He knew I was a lesbian when I came out of the womb. Do you know what I mean? We were in the same year at school. He didn't
Yeah.
see me be born, but um, that was it. I was kind of, yeah, the a massive dyke basically at school and forever. I feel like I've always been just a massive lesbian, and I love that. I love the culture of it. I love the history of lesbianism. I love the community of lesbianism. I love just all of it, and it feels to me like so much more than just a sexuality. And I'm sure a lot of
Mm.
people would probably agree. It feels like an identity.
Mm.
Um, and I struggled a lot as a young person. I was the only, well, I was outed, but I was the only out lesbian in my school. My mum was friends with a lot of lesbians, so I had that kind of community in older people, particularly butch lesbians who, I kind of worship to this day. I love butch lesbians. I just think they're incredible. So, but when I came out at university, student politics is insane, particularly at Cambridge. I think there are a lot of people who, well, are aspiring to be politicians rather. But we call it the Cambridge bubble, that it's just this really insular kind of environment where people become people. You're almost like famous in the Cambridge politics scene. Anyway, the reason I mention that is because once I came out as trans, in a lot of the lesbian spaces that I was part of, I was immediately booted out of. So no, yeah, huge loss of community. It was deeply
Mm.
painful, and no kind of nuance in understanding that, I didn't pass as male at all. Do you know what I mean? Nothing had changed in that regard. I did not gain suddenly male privilege. I wasn't, that all of these reasons that they're like, well, you're not a woman anymore. You can't come to these spaces. You're not a lesbian anymore. And I certainly still felt like a lesbian. Do you know what I mean? It wasn't, that just doesn't go away overnight. And I think there's a conversation to be had. I mean, there's a lot of discourse about lesbians who use he, him pronouns and trans men who identify as lesbians. And to that, I'd simply just say go outside, because, identities and labels, they mean things to individual people. But also, there is a vast history in lesbianism of transness, of, gender queerness, of, all of this kind of exploration of masculinity and presentation, you know. And so the reason, I like genderqueer dyke is because I feel like that captures my experience, it captures who I am, it captures the community I'm part of, it captures the context from which I come. And, that sense of when I was using purely he, him pronouns and identified as a binary trans man, there was this constant kind of grief and mourning and loss of, my lesbianism. because I still dated queer women. It wasn't that I was straight now. That certainly wasn't the case. So in my kind of retransition and exploration of my identity further, again, in the sense of it felt like coming home, I was like, oh, I think I was actually just a lesbian this entire time. I've always felt like that. And it's difficult to talk about because I think there's a lot of gatekeeping and there's a lot of opinions out there about it. And I'm very much of the school of thought of like, be whatever. Like, it really genuinely doesn't matter. The important thing is finding community, building community. And ultimately, the people that matter in those spaces are going to accept you regardless. So it's been really lovely actually to move to Norwich and find a trans community where I'm seeing people who have diverse gender experiences like myself. Whereas before I moved to Norwich, I had trans friends, but we didn't see each other. We just, I made friends with them years and years ago. We didn't live near each other. Do you know what I mean? Usually found them on the internet. But I did not have that trans community until I moved here. So yeah, like I alluded to earlier, it was a very my queerness, my young sort of childhood, teenagehood queerness, and even up until well, yeah, I moved to Norwich a couple of years ago. It was a very lonely experience.
Mm.
I knew other lesbians, I knew other gays, but and they would it was quite nice actually. After we left school, they would all, message me and be like, "Hey, I'm also gay." So I'm like, "Yay," that's really cool. But I didn't have any trans people around me once I left uni anyway, and even then it was only one or two people. And then I lived in Cambridge for a number of years, and I remember often in therapy talking about, I know there are trans people here, there must be, but like where are they? And unlike Norwich, I found in Cambridge just very difficult to find. Once you're not a student, you're kind of on your own. There isn't
Mm.
that kind of sense of community there, I feel. And I feel like I spent ages just trying to find everyone. And I don't know, I never did. And then moving to Norwich, feels like everyone here is trans, which is fantastic. Um, so
Mm.
and I have a lot of, thoughts about will I be accepted by the lesbian community if I decide
Mm.
to date again? How is that going to be? Like, I consider myself, a sort of extremely masculine lesbian, like on the extreme end of butchness potentially. I don't know, but you know,
Mm.
where does that fit? But I talk to my friends about it, and they're like, I don't really think you need to worry because I think the people that matter don't mind. You know what I mean?
Mm.
So, and that was also an interesting experience, kind of coming out again to my friends and kind of, they were like, "What pronouns do you use now?" And I'm like, "I don't know yet. Try all of them. I'm not sure." And there was a little bit of embarrassment there as well because, I'd lived very assuredly, very comfortably as a trans man for many years. And I thought that was it. I completed gender. I'd sorted that out. Um, and then it kind of hit me like a bus, when I was doing this kind of self-exploration work and this meditation and came off the back of living in stealth at my job. So it was, yeah, but they're great. My friends are great. So I'm just, yeah, I'm listening to myself speak and I'm like, I
Yeah.
hope I'm coming across as I want to. I hope, I think what I
Mhm.
really struggle with ultimately is I find it really difficult to find words to describe my experience. But
Yeah.
there is something, the feeling of lesbianism feels like I'm not sure on a lot of things in my life. I'm sure about training to be a therapist and I'm sure about my lesbianism. And that's kind of it.
Mhm. Yeah.
And I met one of the friends that I run my nonprofit project with. She was like, "Yeah, the first time I met you, I just thought that's a dykey guy," and I was like, "Yeah, perfect. I'm glad I'm coming across that way because
Yeah.
that's what I'm hoping for." But I still struggle. There's that feeling of, am I welcome? Am I allowed to use these labels? Like,
Mhm.
is that right? Is it feels kind of wrong? It feels like I'm not entitled to that, and I think a lot of that is um what's the word? Like legacy from that time at uni when I was kind of spat out and ejected immediately from my community, and I never found one again after that.
Yeah.
I felt, I wrote articles on it, and I carried that grief. It's a huge grief to find a queer community and to finally be who you want to be and then discover a new part of yourself and to be really excited about solving that perpetual discomfort
Yeah.
finally having the words and the realization for this is who I am, celebrate this with me.
Yeah.
And to have those people turn around and be like, well, you know, good for you, but you're not one of us anymore.
Yeah.
So take a hike, basically, was devastating, as I'm sure you can imagine.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I often reflect on how lucky I feel living in Norwich now and having the opportunity to be a gender freaky dyke again and coming
Oh,
home to myself. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah. Yeah. Norwich is a friendly place like that. I'm really glad it is actually. Yeah, gosh, that makes so much sense. Like if you don't tick all the boxes of this, that there is so much, like you say, there's gatekeeping if you're not cis and then you enter these non-cis spaces, there is still gatekeeping in those
Mm,
spaces. And there's still like the more non-binary spaces, the more fluid spaces, it's tricky to navigate and you know finding the words to
yeah.
describe yourself and all that kind of stuff. I mean, one word you just used was retransitioning. I've recently had a
Mm,
conversation with someone who said they transitioned, then detransitioned, and then retransitioned, which was a Pariera, which is a great episode and very interesting
mm,
person to talk to about that as well. And they've done a lot of inner work and also like you talk about the parts work. I've done some of that myself, which is it's really powerful and really healing. And yeah, like the retransitioning, it's an interesting term because obviously when I just chatted to they brought up the detransitioning and retransitioning, and I was just like, oh, you know, this is the kind of stuff that the gender criticals grab hold of and try to use it against, you know, transitioning for everyone. And I was a bit like, oh
mm,
no, what do I do with this? You know, so I had to sit with it for a bit, and then I was like, no, this is their story, and it needs to be told as it is without, oh, you know, all that stuff. So yeah,
yeah.
I put it out there, and like I have that with some conversations. I have to sit with them for a while, and then I just have to get my head around it because it's like, whoa, you
Yeah.
know. So that kind of happened, and yeah. So I think one of the things like detransition, which is not the word you use retransitioning, which is yeah, I love that sort of nuance as well. And yeah, those conversations are tricky to have with people, I'm sure. Like, and
Mm.
you just described your experience of finding community and then losing that community. And yeah, is there anything else you'd like to add about retransitioning or anything like that?
Yeah, so I suppose I stumbled on the term through a trans TikToker who lived as trans femme, as a trans woman for some years, and then decided that that was enough, and they were ready to what they said. Well, he said retransition. You know, and he made that point of I'm not detransitioning. I don't want people to come along, grab this, you know, and
Yeah,
say, well, here we are, proof that you know transness
yeah,
is a mental illness. And he said, I don't regret for a moment
yeah.
transitioning and living as a woman. It's all part of my trans experience, and I continue to have a trans experience even now living as a man, having
Mm,
been, you know, born male and had a male childhood. So, and I
yeah,
thought, yeah, you know, I'm constantly searching for words that feel right, and
yeah.
retransition was one of them. And so I stopped taking testosterone almost a year ago now.
Mhm,
I think, yeah, I was due my last shot on my birthday, which is the 28th, so almost essentially a year. And that felt like, you know, I'd reached the point. I think had I had the words, had I had the knowledge and the confidence to stop hormones earlier, I would have done. Only by a couple of
yeah,
years. You know, I was on T for 7 years.
mhm,
And that's not because I regretted it at all. I
yeah,
love what testosterone did for me. I felt
mhm,
at the time I was my gender identity was changing to the point where that level of masculinity was now too much and was causing dysphoria the other way, which is quite interesting.
gosh, yeah,
You know, we always say that gender is fluid, and then I sit here and I'm experiencing the fluidity of gender, and I'm like, oh, yeah, you know, they're right. So
yeah,
I sat with it for a long time, I suppose the only transition regret I have is not having enough information to learn to know that it is really okay to stop. There aren't stories of people stopping except the ones that
Yeah.
gender critical people co-opt for their,
Yeah.
bank of evidence.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
the reason I use the word retransition rather than detransition is because I'm not trying to get back to where I was before I came out at 21. As I said, I've always been trans. From the day I was born, I've always been trans and I've always been a lesbian. My
Mhm.
gender experience has never been cis at any point. Even when I looked like a girl and I lived as a woman, I was not having a cis experience. So I
Mhm.
use retransition because I'm not moving backwards. There's no
Yeah.
backwards to move towards. I'm using retransition because I'm moving towards something new, which continues to be a fluid gender experience. At the moment, I'm not on hormones. I'm sure I will return to hormones at some point. And this is another part of it, which is the political kind of discourse around transition. As we well know, we don't have to talk about how really difficult it is, but when I stopped taking hormones, it didn't occur to me for some months that, oh God, when I want to start again, will they let me? Which,
Yeah.
as a grown up, I'm nearing 30, to sit and think, will a relative stranger let me access life-saving medication? Because let's not beat around the bush,
Yeah.
it's life-saving.
Yep.
I know for sure if I could not access hormones, I wouldn't be here talking to you today. Do you know what I mean? So,
Yeah.
and that's terrifying. The paternalism of trans healthcare is terrifying, and not just for our young people. We know that that's
Mhm.
difficult, but I'm a grown up who accesses medication for 7 years, and I just want to take a break. And the terror, the deep dark terror, which I cannot look at,
Mm.
lest I spiral of, okay,
Yeah.
in a year's time, when I go back to my GP and I say, okay, I'm ready now to go back, are they going to put me at the beginning of the waiting list again? I transitioned privately initially. I was very lucky
Yeah.
that Cambridge gave me a low income bursary. So I used that to privately transition. And we're
Mhm.
talking 300 quid a pop, for these appointments, which I certainly could not
Yeah.
afford now.
Mhm.
And it took, I think, 5 or 6 years for the East of England gender clinic to get. Well, actually, it would have been way longer than that because I think I was referred in 2018 and I didn't hear
Mm.
until, yeah, whatever. The years are too many,
Yeah.
despite,
Yeah.
whatever the number is, it's too many, frankly.
Mm.
So anyway, I'd gotten too anxious about it. So initially my GP was great. She was like, we'll talk to your gender clinic if you want to stop, you want to stop. But my gender clinic had also discharged me, which is another terrifying thing. And I asked at the
Right.
time, what does this mean? Because I've waited so long to get here. The reason they discharged me was because I didn't want any further treatment. I wasn't yet looking at, hysterectomy or any other surgeries.
Right.
Although interestingly, that would have been done locally. So they would have had nothing, little to do with that anyway. It would have
Right.
been the local gyno team.
Mm. Yeah.
So they discharged me months before I stopped taking testosterone. So in the end, the terror I'd allowed it to, you know, come in enough that I was like, right, I'm going to do something about this. So I messaged my GP and I said, look, I've taken a break from hormones. I'm really concerned given the current political climate that, when I'm ready to come back on hormones, because I'm almost certain I will, that I won't be allowed or I'll be put at the top of the waiting list. And so they booked me in for a phone call a couple of weeks later. And I
Mhm.
was terrified. So it was actually only the other day that it happened. And this very lovely doctor called me. And I was like on the defensive going into the call because I was like, I'm gonna have to
Yeah.
defend myself. That's the
Yeah.
experience of trans healthcare. I'm the expert. I have to advocate.
Yeah.
So he asked me, when do I want to go back on? Why did I stop? And telling someone why you stopped hormones, there's always that worry that you're going to feed into that narrative,
Yeah. Yeah.
you know. And how much of gender identity is this doctor going to understand? How much nuance can he hold?
Yeah.
So I basically was like, the masculinization was becoming misaligned with my current gender identity. And thank God he was utterly wonderful about it. And he said to me, you
Mhm.
know, Frank, my job is to make your life easier and to protect you from the people outside of this building who are trying to make your life incredibly difficult. So naturally, I burst into tears after the phone call because that was
Yeah.
just really profound. So he said,
Mhm.
and I explained to him, I was like, look, I don't want to go back on the waiting list. I can't do it. Do you know what I mean? I felt suddenly like I was a
Mm.
child. And I was like, I stopped taking hormones because I wanted to, and I will want to go back on. And I can't think about waiting 7 years to do that. That I know is far too long
Yeah.
because all of the changes will revert essentially. Well, the majority of them, my voice will stay the same and, you know,
Mhm.
other things, but I know that I will just face dysphoria. And this is the other thing with the difficult, like the wonder of gender fluidity and gender queerness is the freedom of it, but it is also kind of often the bouncing up against the walls of dysphoria that come here and there.
Mm.
My masculinity was causing me dysphoria, and sometimes my femininity causes me dysphoria. Often it feels like I can't
Mhm.
win.
Yeah.
But allowing myself to take this break from hormones was completely the right decision, and I'm so glad I did.
Mhm.
But yeah, there's that real fear. So your original question was, why do I use the word retransition? Because I just see it as a journey, and in the way that,
Mhm.
one might take. I mean, it's not going to encapsulate all of this comparison, but in the way that one might take, an antihistamine when they need it or whatever, I'd like to think that one day hormones could be like that. It's a facilitated medication rather than well, what is the word? A gate kept meditation, a gate kept medication.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
so anyway, he was wonderful. He said, I will make sure that you don't go back on that waiting list. We will directly contact your contact at the gender clinic, even though I'm discharged. I don't know how that will work. But he
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
very reassuring. He said,
Mhm.
I'll probably need about 6 months' notice. So if you want to start hormones again in December, contact me in May. Um,
Mhm.
so at the moment, my barometer for when do I want to get back on is it's those walls again. It's when am I going to start feeling too dysphoric? When am
Yeah.
I, and
Wow.
it's difficult because I also have a lot of dysmorphia. So my concept of self is often inaccurate and often changing. And so, I really have to keep an eye on how am I feeling about my weight, and is that actually dysphoria? Is that dysmorphia? Is that just because I'm having a bad day? So,
Mm.
but
Yeah. Yeah.
knowing I'm still skeptical, I'm
Yeah.
maybe he's just being too optimistic. I don't know. But
Mm. Yeah. Yeah.
it's the paternalism of trans medicine is incredibly difficult, and I really one day I'd like it to be how we treat kind of pregnancy, in the sense of you go to your doctor and you say I'd like a baby now, so they say, okay, how can we help you? We'll provide you with ultrasounds, we'll provide you with prenatal screenings, we'll provide you with all of this support,
Yeah.
these multivitamins and whatever, to ensure that you have an enjoyable, healthy pregnancy. That is your
Mhm.
choice, that is your right. And one day I hope that trans medicine is treated the same.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
Whether
Yeah.
it will ever, I'm not sure. But that's my spiel on retransition.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Yeah. There's a lot in that. It makes me think about how. I mean, in a way, what I would like to argue is like if you go for healthcare, you're an expert on you. Like the doctor might be an expert on a condition, but you're the expert on how that affects you and how you live with that
Mm.
condition. Not that being trans is a condition, just other stuff, generally.
Yeah.
Um, but it is a way of like I do think, I mean, there are people who are not quite as self-aware. They are influenced. It does happen. There's many sides to all these stories, which is
Mm.
also tricky to talk about. I'm like, don't, yeah. But but it is like A was saying, actually, they talked about transitioning like too quickly. It was too
Mm.
fast, it was rushed. And they said that the people who offered gender affirming care, they did exactly what they were meant to do. They offered the care and they encouraged them, to move along through the system. And then they realize, like, no, this is not for me, you know?
Mm,
Yeah, it is a matter of, I guess the tricky thing is like how self-aware is the person who is asking for this particular support, treatment, medication, all that stuff. I mean, it is a tricky thing, but like you say, it should be more accessible and there should be the support along, you know, with that. And even like that is exactly the thing, isn't it? Even if it's not right for certain people, that doesn't mean it's not right for everyone. And you can't deny people medical care
mm,
because, you know, a couple of people regretted it. Because I did read about the statistics for regretting, was it cosmetic surgeries?
mm.
And that is quite high. You know, people are like, wish I hadn't done that. You know, that was wrong. That was a mistake. But for trans or like gender affirming care, I think was it something like 1%
It's it's
regret rate?
i it's incredibly low. It's
Yeah,
incredibly low, and I read somewhere that it's lower than, like, knee surgery, and I've had knee surgery, so
right.
you know what I mean? And that
Yeah.
sucks, you know, and then sometimes I wish I hadn't, but yeah, and I think, you know, people talk about, oh, well, overzealous parents getting their kids into through this gender affirming care, and then
Mm,
it turned out that that's not what they wanted, and I just think the cure for all of this is education. The
right.
cure for, you know, when I was a young person, I didn't know what being trans was. I'd hear the occasional T slur, wouldn't think anything of it. And I know for a fact that in primary school, I mean, my entire childhood was punctuated by strangers asking me, am I a boy or a girl? Grown ups, like adults, would come to me. I'd be like 11 and would just ask me in the street. Like, that's insane, right?
Mhm. Yeah,
Just absurdity. And I think,
yeah,
and you know, like I mentioned, this just ever present visceral discomfort. Had I known when I was younger what dysphoria was, whether it be, you know, gender dysphoria or whatever, had I understood that my experience is not my, you know, singular experience.
yeah.
And you'll hear this in all kinds of, you know, queer discussion and discourses. If only I had known sooner, I wouldn't have experienced the isolation. I wouldn't have experienced the, you know,
Mm,
deep kind of self-loathing or hopelessness. And this is it, you know, if people they try and ban learning about trans identities in schools lest we trans
mm,
the children, but in fact trans children are already there.
yeah,
And they don't have the words and the language to understand themselves. And yet we understand the importance of sex ed, for example, so that children, I mean, you know, there's a weird conservatism around that as well, but I think it's
yeah,
important that we give children language to describe their bodies,
yeah.
right? Why are we gatekeeping that? So why are we not giving children language to understand their gender experience, right? And
Mhm.
so with greater discussion and education around the trans experience for young people, they would, you know, maybe think, okay, maybe this is what I'm experiencing. Let me apply this label to myself, sit with it, see how it helps, talk to my parents about it. Maybe we'll
Yeah,
do some social transition, see how that goes. You know, and then
yeah.
maybe, you know, you can't anymore in this country, but puberty blockers or whatever.
Mm,
And the people are always going to change their minds with anything. I have tattoos I probably shouldn't have gone, but at the same time, that was part of my experience. Do you know what I mean? And
yeah,
I love them
yeah, yeah,
anyway because I kind of hate them. So, you know, and it's
yeah,
just people are the regret rate is so incredibly low. And
yeah.
yet, in you know, in no other science would we look at a 0.01% or whatever it is regret rate and go, right, we're taking the whole thing off, like out of off the shelves. We're getting rid of it. You know, there are some
Yeah.
people I I can't take ibuprofen anymore because I took it once and it like burnt my stomach so much. Just by accident. Like
Yeah.
I was taking it
Well,
normally. I'd eaten a banana beforehand, you know. And now I'm like, Are they gonna take ibuprofen off the shelves now?" No, it's
of course
ridiculous,
not.
and it's that
Yeah.
complete sense of, well, you can't possibly know yourself. At what age? At what age
Right.
am I allowed to know myself? You know,
Ooh,
when I was a
yeah,
kid, I knew. When I was, you know, before the age of 10, I knew. I knew I was gay, fucking hell, before the excuse my French, but before the age of
no,
10, you
yeah,
know?
yeah, Yeah.
10 to 20 when we are learning who we are, and there's that, discord, that narrative of that between 10, 20 is when you discover who you are. And I knew then. Do you know what I mean?
Mm.
And
Yeah.
now 20 to 30, I still know. And it looks different,
Yeah.
but I still know. So at what
Mm.
age will the medical community give me the agency to know who I am? When
Ooh.
I see
Yeah.
them every couple of months for something for 20 minutes, how could they possibly know who I am
Mm.
from that?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah.
the answer to all of it is, it's like how abstinence education doesn't reduce teen pregnancy rates, it increases it. Education is always and
Such rubbish.
information. Yeah, exactly.
Mm. Yeah,
Information is always the way. Um,
yeah.
and
But it's about
exposure,
control, isn't it? Yeah.
of course,
It
entirely, entirely.
yeah, yeah.
Um,
This
and
kind of education, like approved education,
mm,
not to help people think for themselves, but anything that helps
yeah,
people think for themselves or be aware of themselves,
yeah.
that is dangerous, obviously, to the system. But yeah,
Well,
yeah.
yeah, and just it's difficult because I know all of these facts. Like, I think
Mm,
trans people make up like 1 to 2% of the population. So in a room of 100 people, one person is going to be trans. And
mm,
so why are we policing that one person's medical, whatever the hell they want to
right.
do? Also, I
It's
just think, so what
yeah,
if people regret it? Okay. We're allowed to regret things. We
yeah.
there's in legislation for so I used to work in education with vulnerable groups. In the legislation around agency for vulnerable adults is the right to make unwise decisions, which I love.
Mm,
I
yeah,
adore that phrasing, right?
yeah,
Regret is just part of life, and we have the
yeah.
right to make, if these decisions turn out to be incorrect for us,
Mhm.
let it, so be it. You know,
Yeah, yeah,
for
yeah.
most people, as you said, it isn't the wrong decision. It's
Yeah, yeah,
entirely the right decision, and I would
yeah.
do it in every lifetime. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
So,
yeah. And the other thing you said as well was, as an example, people are worried that children or like young people will get rushed through the system and it's not right for them to transition. It's like, well, that is again one of those unicorn situations, isn't it? Like, how often does that happen? Most often it's the other way round. People want to
mm,
slow them down, like, oh no, 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 are you sure? Hang on, sit with it. Don't think about it, you know? That's
yeah, the
more the
rushing isn't
reality.
happening.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's not a thing. It
yeah,
isn't. Yeah.
and it's
And yeah, go on.
yeah. Well, I was just gonna say it's sad because I think about the young people I work with and
Mhm.
how incredible they are to just be themselves unapologetically. And I
Yeah,
mourn for the young version of me who couldn't do that. She couldn't do
yeah,
that because
yeah,
she didn't know. Do you know what I
yeah,
mean? And
yeah, yeah.
I wish she could have had the freedom of self-expression and selfhood. And what greater gift can we give someone than the opportunity to be their most authentic self?
True.
Self-actualization, right?
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And again, that's
so
that self-awareness. If people are on a gender journey, they
mm,
have a level of self-awareness because they kinda there's no other way. You self-inquire more
yeah.
than anyone else who's living their cis het mono life or whatever. And yeah, and again, that is a threat to the system and the proved ways
Mm,
of doing things and all that stuff, really. And like you
yeah.
said, in a way, I wish I'd had awareness when I was younger because I was a heavily masking neurodivergent kid. And I was just like oblivious because I was masking so hard I didn't know who I was. And I'm still unmasking and discovering who the hell I even am now. What I want, what I
Yeah.
need. No idea. No idea whatsoever. So I'm like, oh, I have needs.
Mm,
Okay. Damn, this is terrible news. Now I have to figure this out. It's kind of like that. But yeah, yeah. In different ways, we're all masking to a degree, and some people are
mm,
happy fitting into society and they want the things that are approved of, and that's great. And if they're happy like that, brilliant. But there's so
yeah.
many of us who are just not, and like I feel like I don't fit into any of these things. Like, how do I do life? How do I do love? I'm like figuring it all
Mm.
out now, you know? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely, absolutely. And there's
Mm.
something to be said about, that self-inquiry and meeting yourself and finding yourself that I mean,
Yeah.
people always talk about, finding yourself, but there's a real sacredness to it. To
Mm.
and, to some degree, it is a lifelong journey learning who
Yeah.
you are.
Yeah.
But, I always talk about the trans experience, or certainly my trans experience, being incredibly spiritual and incredibly sacred. And I'm sure a lot of cis people feel that way about their own gender. But I feel,
Yeah.
I've had such a delayed kind of process to getting to that point that,
Mhm.
I would choose to be trans. I really would. Like, if I in a parallel universe, if I wasn't, I would choose to be, which, let's not, tell the gender critical people that it is a choice, but
Yeah.
transness to me is, it's like, it's as part of me as, having 2 ears and having blue eyes.
Yeah.
It's inseparable to my
Yeah.
sense of self and how I move through the world. I mean, part of that is, because of external kind of politicization of my identity and my life. But
Yeah.
I wish, yeah, being trans to me is incredibly special. And,
Yeah.
sometimes I like to joke that it's the better way to live, but I just, yeah, I sit with, the magic of it. And maybe some of that magic is just because I've learned who I am and I've,
Mhm.
integrated all these parts of me and I'm, you know,
Well, you've obviously done a lot of work on yourself, and obviously your direction that you're or the field in which you're studying is also
mm,
like testament to that, I suppose. Because how can you study that and not self-inquire,
well,
you know?
certainly you must,
Yeah.
or you won't be a
Yeah.
good therapist.
Right. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, but in fact, training in therapy, so I'm training in the integrative approach, but, I err towards kind of person centered, which,
Mm.
and one of their main philosophies is that the individual themselves has all the answers and are the expert, right?
Mhm.
Medicine is certainly not person centered a lot of the time. And doing my degree continues to highlight to me how broken the medical system is, which is,
Yeah.
it's a shame. And often I feel like
Yeah.
I talk about it forever and wax lyrical, and it doesn't matter because
Mm.
no one's listening, and if they are listening, they don't care. So, and I'm really conscious to make I never want to make the trans experience just about our pain and suffering and
Yeah.
the shit we have to deal with,
Yeah.
with the NHS, and because it isn't just that. In fact, it's mostly not that. In my I mean, I'm obviously incredibly privileged in the sense that I could transition privately, and I have been able to access hormones. I'm not unaware of
Yeah.
that fact. I'm also white and male passing. I'm not unaware of that fact.
Mhm.
And I don't speak for all trans people, but there's so much more to it, and we don't
Yeah.
see a lot of trans joy. And so,
Mm.
when I work with these young people, a lot of the time, I like to talk about what I'm doing because I'm like, yeah, I have a normal job and I have friends and I go to the sauna and I go to the beach,
Mhm.
you know, things that
Yeah.
famously trans people particularly hate to do, or feel they can't do, and
Yeah.
I hang out with my
Mm.
friends and we order in and we watch films, and by and large I'm just living a very joyful life, and I found my community, which I think segues us nicely into, the kind of non-profit work that I'm doing.
Yeah.
If
Yeah.
Which is, the queer joy movement. So,
Mhm.
which was really born out of the need for and desire for a place where the LGBT community can come together in wellness and rest and joy. I mean, the clues in the name.
Mhm.
We spend a lot of time protesting. We spend a lot of time defending ourselves.
Mhm.
Um, and so, I mean, the organization is the brainchild of a number of people, and we each had our own reasons for starting it, but by and large, it was, we need community and we need to have fun with community in a space that is safe, in a space where we can
Yeah.
connect with ourselves and access wellness, where a lot of the time, in yoga spaces particularly, or general wellness spaces, often weirdly gendered.
Mm.
And,
Yeah.
in a lot of wellness spaces, there's the concept of activism, but there isn't a lot of proactive activism. It's like, yeah, it's no longer enough in activist spaces, or rather in allyship spaces, to just not hate gay people. It's like, yeah,
Mm.
okay, this is, this is basic. We need to be proactive in our allyship. Put a flag up, There are so many classes that I'm like, "Oh, I'd really like to go to this, but, I don't know if I'd be welcome." So, I
Yeah.
mean, if I could, I'd like to give a little background of the movement itself, and if
Yeah,
that's
please do.
relevant. Yeah. So my dear friend Emily had the idea some years ago. No, she'd always wanted to create a space like this. And a couple of years ago, she ran a workshop day, which I attended as a guest. And then with her friend, who's now my friend Diana, who is a Reiki master and teaches dance and yoga. Emily is a trauma informed yoga teacher. And I teach mindfulness and meditation, and of course, I'm training to be a psychotherapist. So, and Emily and I had also always had this dream to have a wellness center where she would do her trauma informed stuff, I would do my trauma informed stuff in slightly different modalities, and we would have all of this, and I'd love to provide free therapy to queer people and all of this stuff. And then really the catalyst for me, and I think certainly for Emily as well, was the Supreme Court ruling on single sex spaces. Because we'd always wanted to create this wellness space, she kind of came to me one day, having had the first iteration of queer joy movement some years before, and having built contacts in the wellness space in Norwich, was like, okay, let's just do it. Let's just do it. I'm sick of going to protests and coming home and having nowhere to go. Where can I connect with my community outside of protests, outside of, pubs,
Mm.
outside of whatever?
Yeah.
So we were just like, all right, let's do it. Let's do it. So it's incredible. We run workshop days. We've got yoga and meditation and Reiki and dance, and we're massage, and we're expanding our offering for like bodyweight classes and ADHD coaching and community, like bring a problem, solve a problem, and we do art stuff, and we're all volunteers.
Amazing.
Um, and it's all low cost. I think well, our last workshop was £15 for 5 hours. So, and it was wonderful because it was our people, and it wasn't
Yeah.
all of our friends who came. It was people I'd never met before.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we had some really great feedback, because I think a lot of, certainly for trans people, things like massage, it's like, that doesn't feel accessible. How am I going to explain my body in the way I want to involve my body in this process, in the ways I want to be touched? But it's like a holistic massage, and we have conversations about that. And the trauma informed aspect of things is it's all invitational. Do what you can, do what you want to, do what feels safe. Um, because we carry a lot of trauma as people. We are traumatized by the systems in which we live. Um, and how often can you come together with 29 other people, in a wellness space and try things out? Um,
Mhm.
Anyway, I'm sure, I hope I've done the project justice. I wonder if Emily's gonna listen to this and would be like, "Oh, you missed out all of these important things," but it's a wonderful place, and, you know, we
Yeah.
I really believe in it. I really believe in it,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
I would eventually love to, once I qualify, provide free and low cost therapy to people through the organization.
Yeah.
Um I'd like to hold group talking circles where we talk about real difficult things, because I certainly feel this sense of, I don't like to talk about difficult stuff because we all know it's happening, and
Yeah.
and you run the risk of just bringing the mood down. Not that we shouldn't talk about difficult things because they're difficult, but sometimes I
Mhm.
don't want to talk about difficult things, but sometimes I do. And I
Yeah.
want to talk about those things with people around me. And I want to get angry, and I want to do some rage yoga or something. So I'd love to hold circles
Yeah.
where we can have really candid conversations about, I'm actually not having a good time and I'm really, really frightened, and just hold
Yeah.
that space for one another. So,
That's so
yeah.
important. Yeah. And I
Mm,
think, yeah, more of this, please. Like you're doing it in Norwich. You've set this thing up out of like a reaction to something real that's happened and that's intense and impactful and scary for people. And I do feel like there's more of this coming. There's more people
yeah,
gathering and in community, really just grassroots is the term I think. Like that
that's it.
that's the vibe. Yes, more of that is going to be yeah.
Yeah, you gotta
Mhm.
fight fascism through community movement and grassroots
Yeah.
action.
Mhm.
And I think
Yeah.
also using our kind of little project as a platform to name things what they are. We're experiencing a turn of tides towards fascism.
Mhm.
Sometimes we're totally already there, and people don't talk about it. You can't
Yeah.
meditate your way out of that. Sometimes you have to gather and you have to do things.
Yeah.
We're hoping to run workshops for like writing to MPs or doing something, like that, because
Yeah,
I think
yeah, exactly. Yeah,
I often certainly feel paralyzed. There's so much going on and I
yeah,
don't know where to start,
there is.
you know.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
and it's about not just picking your lane as such, but also if you feel like you have to show up at demonstrations and all that stuff, you have to do all that work.
Mm.
That's great and that's needed, but that might not be your thing. You might even, I mean, I know
yeah.
it's not my thing, so I do it my way by doing this
Mm,
podcast, bringing together voices in the anthology of hope that's coming up, and
mm.
that is my lane. That's what I feel like I can do. Because if I would try and force myself to do other things that are just not me, then that's pointless, and then I wouldn't have the energy for doing the things that are my thing to do, you know?
Yeah, yeah, exactly,
Yeah,
exactly. And I think I feel like people feel an inordinate amount of pressure to do
yeah,
something.
yeah,
And just like you say, finding your lane and what you can do. There's a lot
yeah,
of shoulds that come around, we
yeah,
should be doing this, we should, and it's like, yes, but, and also yes, and do what you can do,
yeah,
what feels
yeah,
safe.
yeah,
So yeah.
yeah,
But yeah,
yeah,
I'm just, I'm really a true believer in sometimes the antidote to feeling like all is hopeless is to find your people and to find community
yeah,
and, just spend time around, yeah, your people. And it's not going to solve things. It's not going to cure the world of all its
mm,
ills. But, maybe for an afternoon, you do some collaging and then you feel good. And that's enough for
exactly.
that day. That can just be enough for that day. But
Feeling good.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
very
So
important. Yeah,
hope, yeah,
yeah,
our next session, we're hoping to do the monthly. So
yeah,
hopefully it
yeah,
continues
amazing.
to grow.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, I'll link to your website, obviously. Is it queerjoymovement.com?
that's the one. Yep.
That's the one. Okay, so yeah,
Mhm.
people can visit that and see what's around and see what's up and what's next.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and we're
awesome.
always, if some people have things to offer, get in touch.
Yeah, get
We're
in
always
touch.
looking
Yeah,
for
yeah,
more
yeah.
practitioners. I mean, we're all voluntary, so
Yeah,
we
yeah, yeah.
can't pay you. We get donations. We pay people through that occasionally, but
Yeah,
you
yeah.
know,
Yeah.
we're just
Yeah,
giving
yeah.
up our time. So yeah,
Amazing.
there we are.
Mm.
Mm,
Yeah, I love the idea of that. It just feels so wholesome to do. I think that's why I hang out in social enterprise spaces, because
mm,
I have just set up a limited company, because I wanted to separate the anthology publishing and, all the moving parts of it, including the income from it,
mm,
from me. Because I didn't want it to be like, oh, you made this book and where's the money going? In your pocket? And I'm like, no. And
mm.
I wanted to be clear that that is not what's going to happen. So that's what's birthed that. And then hanging out in these spaces. So basically, my company's limited by guarantee with social purpose. So social enterprise spaces, I just find them so wholesome. And I love being in those spaces with those people with these just big dreams of a better world and doing their own thing and just contributing their own, even however small, even this podcast. Like,
Mm.
I get responses, sometimes people write to me sometimes saying, hey, this episode really moved me, or you know what, this really changed my life, and that is just incredible,
Yeah.
like that. And that makes just everything, all the work and all everything I put in, it's worth it. And it's, yeah,
Yeah,
it's so
absolutely.
good. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
Mm.
something like this podcast and having people come in and talk about their experiences it's not lost on me that this is exactly the thing I would have needed, you know, to
Yeah.
probably figure out what was going on for me much earlier
Mhm.
and to know
Yeah.
that it was okay
Yeah.
and it was normal, dare I say, and
Yeah.
it's perfectly acceptable and people will love you. People will love you.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
ultimately it. And it's
True.
it's all going to be okay. And I think a lot
Mhm.
of
Mhm.
I certainly feel it, am I redeemable? Am I lovable as
Yeah.
who I am, purely and
Yeah.
authentically? there is that
Mhm.
kind of deep existential fear that I have, and I'm sure a lot of trans people have. I'm sure a lot of queer people have,
Yeah.
or people, with any kind of difference. But
Yeah.
even when I was just scrolling through the episode list, I listened to a few episodes. I was like, oh my god, people have experience like I have. Like someone called themselves a gender freak, or I'm like, wow, okay, I'm not just making this up. I mean, it would be fine if I
Yeah.
was making it up, but it's
Yeah,
that
yeah.
validation that I'm feeling even now that's so important. And I read Stone Butch Blues recently, and kind of every time I read it, I'd end this kind of reading session in floods of tears, because I'm like, this person has my experience decades ago.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a fictionalized biography, but and it's just that sense of belonging. It's
Mhm.
such a important, I mean, on the hierarchy of needs, it's pretty important,
Yeah.
but that sense of belonging that I think queer people can spend so much of their lives searching for. And if
Yeah.
I can do my bit to just provide that, I mean, you're doing your bit in this podcast, right? If I can do my bit in just being visible and using all three of the pronouns I use, or, talking about my
Yeah.
experience, or if I can do that by helping facilitate this space through this project, or I can do that
Mhm.
by volunteering for and working with trans young people,
Yeah.
you know,
Mhm.
in a world where it's so constantly in our faces that we're not okay. Like, it's not
Yeah.
okay to be who we are. And it's funny, I feel it's quite cliche to say, and it's kinda like what I said earlier, where I don't want the trans experience to feel like it's suffering all the time. And
Mhm.
sometimes I even feel like I'm taking up too much space by talking about my trans experience, particularly in my training
Mhm.
where, you know,
Yeah.
um, we have to do a lot of self-exploration, and we have to understand our differences. And in our anti-oppressive practice, we're understanding that diversity is held by everyone. There isn't a normative, you
Yeah.
cannot create a normative personhood within anti-oppressive practice. So I'm doing a lot of reflecting on my experience. And even then, when that is the whole point, I feel embarrassed to talk, like I'm talking about
Yeah.
being trans too much.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, and I
Yeah.
think that's probably by design, that I have that feeling, externally by design, right? I've been given that. That's not my voice. I've been given that by, years and years of anti-trans
Mm.
oppression. But
Yeah.
so there's always, even coming to this podcast, I thought, well, I'm really excited and I cannot wait to talk about, my gender and my gender journey, and how it's okay to retransition, and how
Yeah.
you can be a lesbian and look like me and people will love you regardless. But
Yeah.
sometimes there's that kind of black poison, this dark, treacle
Mhm.
thick poison of, oh, well, you're just being conceited. You're being so
Yeah.
conceited because you're just talking about you and your identity too
Mhm.
much.
Mhm.
And so I have to do a lot of work to kind of shed that. And I think come to the realization that on the large scale of things, people aren't having these conversations. Like, this
Mhm.
podcast isn't, it fills a fairly large niche, in the sense of people aren't doing this. But I think when
Mhm.
you live in queer community, as I do all day, every day, sometimes I forget there are people that are straight and cis, so I forget there are cishet people. So, which is
Yeah.
wonderful. What a wonderful way to live. But it's somehow still in this queer utopia I feel I'm building and living in.
Mhm.
There's that shame I have
Yeah.
of expressing and celebrating my queerness, because I'm doing it
Yeah.
too loudly, or I'm not doing it in the
Yes.
right way, or
Yeah.
even within community I'm being judged, because
Mhm.
I feel like sometimes I'm a minority within a minority, you know.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah,
And
yeah, yeah.
so it's interesting, kind of feelings that I'm noticing coming up as I'm having these conversations of, yeah, there's this shame there.
Yeah.
And yet at the same time, I'm holding this deep, intense, indescribable joy and expansiveness and strength and freedom, you know.
Mhm. Yeah.
So that
Yeah.
just something to ponder on, you know. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, I love that. Yeah, exactly like you say, like, we need more antidotes to shame.
Mm. Yeah.
And I can relate in my own way, like, taking up space is
Mm.
is, something I'm reclaiming or claiming for the first time, being a
Mm.
recovering people pleaser, having been socialized as a woman, all that stuff. And
Um,
yeah, just recovering from that, unmasking. Yeah, it's like this the whole shame thing, this internalized shame. It's just connected to this deep sense of unworthiness, and it's
mm.
about reclaiming that we are worthy just because we exist, all of us.
Yeah.
And yeah, and oh yeah, and I'm just thinking about other, like, there's an episode I did. This is quite a while ago, a few years ago,
Mm.
and it was with a man called Brian. So he talked about, I think the title he gave me for the podcast was Cis Male of Trans Experience. I think I could look this up.
Mm.
And he ended up back in a place of, not back in a place, but he was also saying he went from A to B to C, not from A to B to A.
Yeah.
That's in a similar way as well. So he had lived his life as Tish up to a degree, and then I guess he detransitioned, but he used the term retransition for himself as well,
Mm.
for his journey as well. And yeah, that was super interesting. And also, like, the antidote to shame just made me think of a book that I contributed to that has got a story in it from a man who talked about his sexual experience and really wanting to be pegged, and I
Mm.
think there's a lot of shame in that as well. And he was just like, "It's all there, it's all out there." So it's amazing. Yeah, Sex Meets Life. Get a read of that. And that's just all these things, like all these people, all of us telling our story, even maybe reluctantly, even if we're trembling or scared, but
Mm.
taking up that space. And, like, yeah, that's how we fight fascism, basically. That is how we
Well,
do it.
yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's funny. I'm sitting here and I'm feeling like I have this anxiety. Like, have I said enough? Have I represented myself well
Yeah.
enough? Are
Yeah.
people going to listen to this? Have I been accidentally offensive? I'm
Yeah.
trying to be aware of my privileges and my intersections.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Have I done myself and my community justice?
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is, yeah, I wonder if other people feel like that.
I
I
mean, I
wonder
do, for
if,
definite. Yeah. Even,
yeah,
in me here talking to you, that is a constant in my head, like, "Oh, what have I just said? Is
mm,
that okay? Oh god, is that gonna be taken the wrong way?" Blah, 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 all that stuff. But
yeah,
it's there, and it's like, well, I'm gonna say the things anyway and just let that be there and let that chat away in the background, but I'm gonna say it anyway, you know? But yeah,
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 exactly.
exactly.
Yeah.
We're imperfect and we're always learning, and that's
Yeah,
important. But yeah,
definitely.
I just wanted to talk a little if we have time, I guess.
Yeah, I was gonna ask you, like, is there anything else you wanna talk about?
Yeah, I wanted to
Yeah,
talk a bit about my training. So I'm
yeah,
studying for a master's in counselling and psychotherapy at the
yeah.
moment,
Mhm.
which, as I said, there's few things in life I'm sure of, but this is one of them. And
Yeah,
going in, I study in London, so I'm there once a week. And going into it, I I've been in therapy my whole life and I love it. I love therapy. It's not because I like talking about
therapy
myself,
is
but I do
great.
like talking about myself, but it's the main tool that's helped me turn around and meet myself, right? And
Ooh,
people ask me all the time, "Why do you like therapy? Why do you think people should have therapy?" And I think everyone should have therapy.
definitely.
Regardless of whether they're
Mhm.
going through the most difficult period of their time or actually they're the happiest they've ever been. I think
Yeah,
everyone deserves a space to sit and reflect and have
yeah,
somebody hold them with no
yeah.
judgment, in safety and in compassionate empathy, without
Mm,
judgment,
mhm.
and to kind of just have that space, I think, is incredibly special. And I didn't always want to be a therapist. For a long time, just couldn't get my head around how. And then I had a great therapist, or rather, get my head around why people would want to do that. Um, and then I had a great therapist when I was at uni who kind of changed my life, essentially. I've had
Mhm.
many therapists who are wonderful. My current therapist is wonderful. So I decided that's what I wanted to do. And I think a lot of it, as I'm realizing, many of my pursuits are often in the pursuit of healing my inner child. But she's wonderful, and I wouldn't be here if she hadn't been there, you know? So
Yeah.
I want to show trans people, and ideally I'd well, I want to work in trauma therapy, and I want to work with trans people, but
Hmm.
I think it's really important to see yourself. You know, we always say representation matters. I have had one trans therapist actually, and that was wonderful. It was incredible, incredibly transformative. And to provide that space for other trans people, you know, feels like my calling. I remember I went to a festival last year, and we were all quite drunk, and it was the end of the night. And this guy was like, you know, what is your purpose in life? And I immediately, you know, I feel really and truly is to make the world better for trans kids. Like, I feel that's my
Yeah.
purpose, right? To save the trans
Yeah.
kids. And which sounds noble. And again, that's that voice being like, oh, you're so conceited. Like, why do you have to make
Yeah.
everything about being trans? Everything is about being trans, newsflash. Um, um, but yeah, I'm really enjoying the training. It's in even a deeper way allowing me to turn around and look at myself and look at all the parts I want to hide and all the parts that maybe I'm ashamed of and all the biases that I hold knowingly or unknowingly,
Mhm. Yeah.
and hold at the hands of all of those parts again in deep compassion and understand why and what's going on, and then ultimately to provide a safe and holding space for somebody. I just think it's kind of the pinnacle of pure human interaction and humanity and social connection. I love people. I mean, I do. I love talking to people. I was going to say I could spend my whole life just hanging out. And I love that. I love people. I love understanding people. I like to go and meet people I would never talk to. You know, I had a coffee date with a couple of Mormons a few weeks ago.
Wow.
And they were incredible. You know, we have very different
Yeah.
beliefs, but we
Yeah.
found that my training of therapy and their kind of mission, you know, we were all holding one another and learning about one another. And I thought, well, this is what it's all about. We're so very different. And
Amazing.
I don't
Yeah.
believe in what you believe. You don't believe in, I didn't tell them I was trans because I thought, let's not have that conversation, which is interesting, perhaps something to journal about. I don't know. But anyway,
Yep.
I feel like therapy and therapeutic interventions, you know, let me not say that Western talking therapy is the best and the gold standard of way to do things. I don't believe in that at all. I don't
Mm.
even believe that
Yeah.
talking therapy is, I think somatics is super important as well.
Yeah.
But any kind of therapeutic space, you know, whether that be dance circles, whether that be one-to-one talking therapy, whether that be, I don't know, whatever.
Mhm.
It's that real, you strip everything away and you access the unconditional positive regard you have for another human being purely
Mhm.
on the basis of they are another human being
Yeah.
is just something that, again, it's just spiritual for me. It's
Yeah.
deeply sacred. And if I can have the privilege and the honor of holding that space for another human being, then wow, what a life I will lead, you know? And I think about,
Mhm.
I have to do my placement hours and I'm kind of terrified because sometimes I think, well, I'm just me, I'm just this little guy and you know, I'm
Yeah.
being trusted to, but you know, all my
Yeah.
tutors and everyone I talk to is always just, you just show up as a person,
Yeah.
sit there and be and be with.
Yeah.
Um and so yeah, it feels like my calling. And I'm really enjoying the training and it's great. And if anyone who's listening is, you know, on the fence about it or has always wanted to do it, just do it. Bloody well do it because I can't describe, it's a long old slog, it's difficult, but my God, is it really something special? I feel like I'm getting
Mm.
emotional just talking about it, but
Mm. Mhm.
what a way to know and be known in the sense of, well, you know, people like you're a therapist, you shouldn't self-disclose, but to know and be known is you know, to sit in space with someone, to sit in connection with someone. I just think I don't know that I've actually made any sense in the last couple of minutes, but what a privilege is
Yeah.
what I'm saying, and
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
what a special thing to be able to do.
Yeah.
And I'm humbled by it all of the time. I love
Mm.
people,
Mhm.
and you know, it's even something that I always try and practice this anyway, but it's really helped me. You know, the people that hate me for who I am, the people that hate trans people, the people that hate immigrants, the people that, you know, whatever, there's a challenge for me as a trainee therapist to, I'm not saying that therapists always have to have empathy for everyone all of the time. We are human after all. But what it has allowed me to do is dig real deep into who is this person? What have they lived to get them to this point? How is it different to what I have lived to get me to this point? Because, a flip of a coin means I could have been over there, on that side of the protest, a flip of a coin meant they could be on my side. It's so circumstantial, and there are so many circumstances that contribute to the paths that we follow in our lives and where we end up.
Mm.
So
Yeah.
finding that kind of empathy for people that a lot of the time I hate, or I'm scared of, or I'm saddened by, has
Mm.
really helped me in quite a healing way to think,
Mhm.
being angry all the time is really difficult. And again,
Yeah.
I'm acknowledging my privilege of being able to access these feelings and to be able to step back. And I
Yeah.
have enough privilege that, yes, being trans is difficult and sometimes very dangerous, but I'm also not a Black trans person. I'm not a queer trans person of color. These things, I
Mhm.
think it's
Yeah.
important to note, um,
Yeah.
that
Mhm.
within, intersections exist. But
Yeah.
what I'm trying to say is, what am I trying to say? Training to be a therapist for me has been both beautiful in the connection I've made with people and beautifully expansive in the connections I've made with myself. And I think it's a nice antidote for that feeling of shame and conceitedness to bring my transness into that space and to
Yeah.
recognize it as a strength of experience and a strength of teaching, a tool of teaching also.
Mm. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so that's what I have to say about that, really, I think. I hope that made sense.
Yeah. Yeah. That's really beautiful. And can you imagine, like, if you're a trans kid and there is the option to have a trans therapist? I mean, how good
Mm.
is that?
Well,
How
exactly. You
brilliant
don't
is
have to
that?
explain yourself. Of course, I'm not, as a therapist, going to assume I know everything about this
Yeah.
person. They are, of course, the
Yeah.
expert in themselves,
Mm.
on themselves, the expert on themselves. But fuck, imagine having, I don't have to explain to my therapist what dysphoria feels like. I don't have to explain to my therapist, the
Yeah.
ins and outs and the nitty gritty of hormone therapy
Yeah.
and what's happening to my body. I don't have to explain the kind of sometimes bone deep loneliness, or I don't have to explain the indescribable joy of the trans experience. It's
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
you can feel at home. I think you have
Yeah.
the opportunity to feel at home, and I think
Mhm.
that's really just all we want, isn't it?
Totally.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yes.
Mm.
Beautiful. That sounds like a great place to wrap it up. Is there anything else you want to
Yes.
add, or are you feeling good?
No, I'm feeling
Yeah.
good. I'm concerned that when I listen back, I'm like, oh, I should have said all of these things, but I think I've
That is
described my
always the
gender.
way.
I
Yeah.
think yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Um,
Oh, it's been
just
great. Yeah.
yeah, be a he him lesbian is what I'm saying to our listeners. It doesn't matter. Be a lesbian. Just everyone should be a lesbian. Yeah.
Just be a lesbian.
Just be a lesbian. Yeah.
Ah,
But no,
amazing.
thank you ever so much for having me. This has been really wonderful.
Thank you for
And
joining me.
thank you for, yeah, and thanks for doing the podcast. I mean, like I
Yeah.
said, even, I've been transitioning for years, and this is still a resource where I'm like, feeling validated and feeling just incredibly, I don't know, excited by hearing other people's stories. So thank you so much for doing what you do, and inviting me. What an honor and a privilege to be invited to talk
Oh,
about stuff. Yeah.
the honor and privilege is mine as well. Amazing. Oh, thank you so much. Yay.
Thank you.
You can find out more details on the website at 50shadesofgender.com/Frank, where you can also read the transcript. And you can find Frank on Instagram at Frank__Val, and the Queer Joy Movement on queerjoymovement.com and on Instagram at queerjoymovement. Thank you for listening to the 50 Shades of Gender podcast. You can find us online at 50shadesofgender.com, as in FIFTY, on social media and on YouTube. Visit the website to support us, find out about our gender diversity and allyship workshops and courses, and keep up to date on the Anthology of Hope, which will be out somewhere in the middle of 2026. Visit 50shadesofgender.com/hope for more information and updates. We hope you will listen again. Until then, stay curious and open-minded.
And so what I mean by gender freak is, in my mind, it's just all made up and you can be whatever you want. And I like to, dress the way I dress, which isn't particularly out there. I feel like I dress kind of normal. Well, no, cut that bit out. I'm not, I don't do in the, let me start again. See, I also edit podcasts a lot, so I'm like,
That's fine.
um,
Yeah.